I'm going to go ahead and start recording. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us for the How Lawyers Are Securing SNAP Benefits for Low-Income Community webinar. I am happy to introduce our presenter today. It's Saima Akhtar. She is a senior attorney with the National Center for Law and Economic Justice. She works on issues that include supplemental nutrition assistant program benefits, cash public assistance, emergency assistance, low-income child care subsidy benefits, and concerns of due process. Saima has represented low-income clients both in court and administrative proceedings and has served as a counsel in a number of class action cases in state and federal courts. She has provided continuing legal education sessions for the New York State Bar Association, the Shriver Center on Poverty Law, Practicing Law Institute, and the National Legal Aid and Defenders Association, on top of substantive, and prejudicial law. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Saima.
Can you hear me? Did I manage to get myself off mute?
Yes, sounds great.
Fantastic. All right. I'm going to attempt to share my screen just so we practice. Thank you for your help setting me up here. We're going to do, okay, I'm going to do slideshow. Share my screen. Okay. And are we in the right place, Andrea?
Right place.
Fantastic. All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Saima Akhtar. I'm a senior attorney at the National Center for Law and Economic Justice. We're going to talk a little bit about a whole bunch of things. This is a very, very quick overview of some of the things we're going to be covering today. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my organization, the National Center for Law and Economic Justice, who I am, what's going on with SNAP benefits right now, some of the rights that people have, and tell you a little bit about some of the specific concerns and complaints that we've had. And then we're going to talk about sort of how to approach that and things that you can do. Hopefully it won't be too crazy or too much work. I know that people are really busy. There's a lot going on. But thinking about how to troubleshoot some of these issues when you get the chance. And I'm just going to make sure that I can see my chat here. I wanted to make sure to say that if you have questions, I'm happy to take them if you raise your hand or drop those in the chat. I will do my best to respond as soon as I'm able. I'll also try and leave some room at the end, but I always feel like it goes better if I take the questions right as they're coming in case people are confused. If you're confused, it's very likely someone else will be also. So those are my quick introductory bits. So I work at the National Center for Law and Economic Justice. The National Center for Law and Economic Justice works with low-income families, individuals, and communities across the country to advance the cause of economic justice through groundbreaking successful litigation policy work and support for grassroots organizing around the country. We provide legal representation, support, and advice to people living in poverty and their advocates. We've been doing this since 1965. Our office is based in New York City. I am not in New York City, but the office is based there. This organization came about, sort of grew out of the welfare rights movement in the 1960s, and the work largely started out and for decades focused around cash benefits, cash assistance, welfare benefits, and SNAP as well. It expanded into a range of other income support benefits like SSI and unemployment, but we also do work on things like subsidized low-income childcare, which is something near and dear to a lot of our hearts. For me, I am the senior public benefits attorney at NCLEJ right now. I have been doing legal services work for about 15 years. Before that, I did emergency domestic violence work and ran a shelter for about 5 years. Um, so I've done a whole bunch of different benefits issues. I have worked on subsidized low-income childcare, which is probably something familiar to a lot of the folks on here. Home energy assistance benefits, HEAP, as well as SNAP and cash assistance benefits, occasionally Medicaid too. Um, so we're going to talk about SNAP today. SNAP is, I think people probably know, but I will just say to be sure, we're talking about the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Benefits. Up until about 15 years ago, they were called food stamps. SNAP is the new name of the federal food stamp program. It's not really new in name anymore, but it's the name of the federal food stamp program at this point. The work that's done at NCLEJ touches on litigation, meaning we take state government agencies to court and deal with the cases and the clients. We do training about SNAP for lawyers, anti-hunger advocates, and community organizations that work with people who use SNAP or who might interface with SNAP. And then we also provide information and technical assistance about SNAP to community groups who work on a range of different benefits issues and access issues. So that's things like, hey, if we make a change like this to how the child tax credit works, do you think it will impact the SNAP benefits in the state of Kansas, for example? I'm just making this up, but things like that. So that is my general overview. So what's happening in SNAP right now? I don't know how much people have sort of caught this. It's definitely been in the news. And in some places it's been in the news a lot because the situation is dire. Right now, the sort of big picture issue is that SNAP programs are failing across the country. People, as a baseline, cannot get their benefits. This is a really big problem for an entire program structured around the idea that if you apply, you will get a benefit that allows you to buy food. So what it means is that people who are applying can't buy food. They don't have those benefits in hand for one of a number of reasons. What is happening varies somewhat from state to state. There are delays in processing applications and recertification. So an application is something that's coming in new, and a recertification is a continuation where we're going to need, people are required to file paperwork and participate in a new interview every however much amount of time. The length of those recertifications can vary. But there are delays, and that means that if the cases are not decided, those people are not getting their food benefits. The agencies are experiencing staffing problems. So all over the country, state agencies that issue benefits, county agencies in some states are having staffing, hiring problems. They are dealing with massive vacancies. In some states, they are hiring and subcontracting with private companies for extra workers to help with capacity, but there are not enough agency employees to do the work. A third piece of what's going on in the SNAP program right now relates to the end of pandemic-related changes. So SNAP, just like every other benefits and assistance program in the country, went through a whole bunch of really, really quick sort of simplifications and changes during the COVID pandemic that were done in an effort to make the program more accessible and easier for both the agency and the participants. And those are phasing out now. So I think the Medicaid, what has been called the Medicaid unwinding, gets a lot of attention in this regard. And that certainly is going on right now as well. But at the same time, as the Medicaid programs are unwinding and Medicaid is having to sort of return to normal operations after the pandemic, SNAP is in the same boat. The SNAP programs are trying to have to resume normal operations, and it's not going well for a lot of states. And finally, the other thing that's happening is not necessarily specific to right now, but it is a big piece of the puzzle. Um, and those are technology changes. Many states that operate their benefit programs use what are called sometimes legacy systems. These are computers that I say jokingly, but not really jokingly, are like the Flintstones computer systems. It's like a bird carving code into a stone tablet with its beak. And probably only some people who are on this are old enough to remember what that looked like on the Flintstones. But um, these computers, by modern standards, are wildly old, like literally 30 and 40-year-old computer systems that will run the SNAP benefits and the welfare benefits for an entire state for hundreds of thousands of people. And states are having to upgrade their systems, potentially move into a new system, or try and find ways to marry old technology with new technology, which sometimes goes well, sometimes does not go well. But it's a huge piece of work, and it's also a place where there is a potential for delay and difficulty with a state's SNAP operation. In early 2024, a couple months ago, I think it was the month of February, the Federal Food and Nutrition Service, that is responsible for SNAP benefits, sent out warning letters to 47 states. This is 47 out of essentially 51 agencies, because the District of Columbia has its own agency. So 47 of essentially 51 agencies got notifications from the federal agency that oversees the SNAP program about the things that they were doing wrong and the things that needed to be fixed. So when we talk about a crisis in SNAP and we talk about a crisis in the feeding programs, this is really the scope, that it's the level of problem that we are talking about. It is everywhere. It is everywhere, and actually a lot of those states, probably almost half of them, I think it was between 20 and 25 states, had gotten letters in 2023 as well. So this has been an ongoing issue that is getting worse right now. And we know that people are going without their food and their food benefits because of this. So to understand the sort of real pieces of what's going on with SNAP, we need to understand what should happen from my perspective. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about how the SNAP program should work in the best case scenario, or when things are operating correctly. And then we'll talk about sort of what's going wrong. From a most basic standpoint, though, the SNAP program the application process has 3 basic steps. There is an application that needs to be filed or made, an interview that needs to be had with the agency and the household that's applying, and there's some amount of verification that needs to be conducted to determine people's income and sort of what their budgeting looks like. SNAP is great in its verifications in some ways. You don't have to verify every single thing, but you do have to verify a few things. And once those 3 basic steps have been done, an eligibility determination can be made by an agency worker. And the SNAP program is different than Medicaid and most cash assistance programs in that the eligibility decision has to be made by what's called a merit employee, a person who actually works for the social services issuing agency, either the state or the county, depending on which way your program operates. So that is sort of the basic pieces. I just want to say clearly that an application can be done online. It can be faxed in. It can be filed on paper and mailed in or handed to the agency. There are states that have applications where you can even do the application over the phone. That is not every state, but some states do a telephonic application. Interviews can be in person. They can be over the telephone. So there's a lot of flexibility here, but the steps have to happen, right? We can't just completely skip them. We'll talk about that in a second. But these are the baseline pieces of what it takes to get sort of beginning to end to get people their SNAP, that eligibility determination. So the right to receive SNAP on time. And this is a big piece of what's going wrong in a lot of states right now is that SNAP is really, really delayed. People are not getting their benefits in any semblance of time, and the state agencies are not rendering these determinations of eligibility. They're not figuring it out within the legal, there is a legal requirement of timing, and the states are not meeting this, or the counties are not meeting this. And what that timing standard is that for households who have very, very limited resources and very, very limited well, basically no assets, essentially no assets and very limited cash on hand, less than $100 cash on hand, or if they have excessive income expenses compared to their income, they actually are entitled to receive SNAP within 7 days. Within 7 days of the date they make their application. For everybody else, it's 30 days. It's 30 days for the general processing standard for SNAP. People can ask for an extension, right? If you are providing forms and verification, you can ask for extra time, longer than that. But when the agency has everything in hand, they are to be processing within 30 days. And just to be clear, when I talk about an eligibility determination in SNAP, what that actually means is that the household gets one of two things, right? There's not sort of a halfway point here. It means that they are denied. So a denial should be including a written notice that tells the person why they've been denied and that they have a right to ask for a fair hearing, an administrative hearing on that SNAP denial. Or the person's case gets opened. And a case opening means that they need to actually have an EBT benefit card in their hand, and there needs to be money on it for them to spend on their food. It's not, one of the things I know that's happening in some places, actually a lot of places, is that the states are asking for extra time, or they are taking extra time without asking, because they're mailing the EBT cards from another location, perhaps. And so the state will send a written notice of eligibility determination. Congratulations, your SNAP case is open. You're entitled to $343 in SNAP a month. You're going to be mailed a card and a PIN number separately. And then that takes another 2 weeks. And people do not have any way to access benefits during that time. And this means that they're going without food. It's a huge, huge deal, and it's not consistent with the legal requirements and the federal regulations for the program. I'm just going to take a minute. If anyone has questions so far, I know I'm talking quickly, but I'd really rather talk about sort of troubleshooting in real time than just focusing on this. If you have questions, please drop them in the chat, or you can raise a hand. Any of these things work, and I'm going to have a sip of water quickly. So in the SNAP process, there are actually a number of protections for the people who are applying for SNAP. I've got a bunch of these in the slides and you'll get them, but I wanted to highlight on the slide a couple of the things that I think are most important to think about, because I know that this is something that's coming up in a number of states right now. The SNAP applicants, when they are applying, they have a right to file an application the same day that they contact the agency. There are a whole bunch of different ways that this can go wrong. One of the things that has come up for us in our experience is that there are, and this is very obvious and also very real, there are agencies that essentially hold on to the applications and make people who come in person wait in line to get up to the window to see a worker to be handed an application. You can't actually access it. And that means that if there's a long wait, you may not actually get an application form. Um, I think this is an incredibly big problem. I think the application forms just need to be out and they need to be freely accessible to people who are walking into the agency to seek SNAP benefits. Um, some states have an online application. This isn't a requirement, although I'm going to say that in 2024, I think it's really a big problem for states not to have an online application. If I can order a pizza online, people should be able to apply for SNAP benefits online too. But people don't actually need to apply in person, and states can't require people to show up in person. Another question to think about is whether or not people can get an application mailed to them. How hard is it to get an application sent by mail? Um, the other thing I wanted to highlight is what's called the authorized representative. The SNAP program in federal law, right, that Congress actually wrote this into the program. It's not an option, gives people who get SNAP the opportunity to put another person on their application, not to use their benefits, but to help them with their benefits, whatever that may be. So if you are working with families that may have disabled folks who may have transportation barriers, that may be struggling to get to an office, they may not have consistent phone access. Being an authorized representative or having an authorized representative can be super helpful because it means that the authorized representative can answer questions on the case. They can even get a duplicate card and go shopping. So if you, for example, knew a lot of times this comes up with elderly clients as well, or folks who have mobility impairments. If you have a situation where people are not readily able to get out and shop on their own behalf, an authorized representative is another way to address that. This was set up, literally probably 40 years ago in the SNAP program. It's a different universe now in certain ways because we have online purchasing and online grocery shopping, and that there's been a bunch of progress, particularly in the last few years during the pandemic, with making it possible for people to use online grocery purchasing and delivery services in some places where that's an option. But the authorized representative piece is something that's been built into the SNAP program for years and years. But the authorized representative can literally participate in interviews and take phone calls on behalf of a SNAP household. So it's a pretty big role to step into. It's not just sort of something you do one time, because you can also get duplicate copies of their mail and their cards. But it's a really big deal, and people should have a right to do that if they want to, and they can't be required to do it. SNAP builds in a whole bunch of really basic core civil rights protections. So the SNAP program incorporates a whole bunch of federal civil rights laws already, which guarantee and are intended to ensure that people who are applying for SNAP and seeking SNAP are free from discrimination on the basis of race or the color of their skin, disability discrimination, age discrimination. There are specific requirements in the SNAP Act that people who are in single language minority households receive interpretation and translation. You are not required, these folks are not required to provide their own interpreter. So there's a whole bunch of protection that's already there. And the Food and Nutrition Service has also sent out what's called a guidance letter to a bunch of the states. That guidance letter is just a way that the Food and Nutrition Service shares policy documents with SNAP offices all across the country. And what that does is also offer protection in the Food and Nutrition Services universe on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. And these are all part of SNAP. So it is sometimes important to remind the agency that they have these obligations, but it's also really important to remember that a lot of things are harder for clients who are limited English proficient or who may have different disability-related service needs to access the program, but the program is actually obligated to do those things. It's not that the client is imposing. This is all written into the structure of SNAP, that folks who have particular needs, if you are disabled, for example, and need whatever it may be to participate in the program the same way as a non-disabled person, the onus is already on the agency. That agency is already obligated to be providing those things. And just as an example, I mean, this is sort of the easiest example, right? Is the agencies that provide SNAP are supposed to be making sure that disabled folks have the same opportunity to participate in the program as others. So in New York, a number of years ago, where our organization is based, there was actually a lawsuit about written materials for individuals who are blind or visually impaired. If, for example, there was a written application and there was no provision made for large print or braille materials so that a person who was blind or visually impaired could not actually use the application form that the state agency was requiring, that would be a point of disability discrimination, right? It's a very obvious one, but it's also a very clear one. And in the case that was brought here in New York, there was a settlement to the lawsuit, and as a result of that, the state of New York does produce a number of materials in Braille and large print that are available online and by mail on request at this point in time. So it's really just it is built into the fiber of the program. I like to think about that, right? SNAP is built in, there are these equalizing pieces built into the fiber of the SNAP program. There are a few extra protections for unhoused people that I just like to point out, because I think it can be really, really hard and really critical if you're working with folks who have essentially really just all of their basic needs need to be met, who are without an address, who do not have access to food, who do not have a steady source of income. Unhoused people cannot be denied SNAP because they don't have an address. So one thing that comes up and that I hear sometimes is that you can't get SNAP here because you can't prove you live here when you don't have an address. You're not able to receive SNAP here because you're not from here, you don't have an address. And that simply isn't true. The SNAP program specifically protects people who do not have a permanent address, who are unhoused. They are actually not required to provide an address for homeless individuals, and they are eligible for SNAP. So it's really, I think you have to know this and to be able to make these points and to deal with these issues when you are advocating on behalf of families who have really just crisis levels of need, which is something that was part of my early practice experience. Verification requirements can be waived for homeless applicants of SNAP. And one of the things that I think is really helpful about SNAP is that SNAP does not actually require you to show up and verify with very specific documents. You can verify information actually through what are called collateral contacts, which literally means that if the client has lost their documentation, if they don't have it for a whole bunch of things, essentially a personal reference or a personal contact will allow people to verify through another person. And this is really powerful. I don't know how many of you have worked with a person who's unhoused, who may not have their identity documents, they may have lost things, they may have been through incarceration, and being able to essentially vouch for them and say, I know them, I know they are who they are, and I know that they have, this is their household or their family, and they really do live here, and have that be good enough for the government agency is actually a really big deal. So I always think that's a very cool, very empowering thing about the SNAP program that I like to highlight for folks who are talking to families and clients and reminding them that SNAP is a program that was set up to make sure that people get fed, and that's really the highest priority here. Right. So to that end, I think I just said this, but SNAP applicants cannot be required to provide only a single type of verification. So you have to verify birth date or identity, for example. The state agency actually cannot say you're only allowed to provide your birth certificate, and if you can't give me a birth certificate, I'm not going to consider your application. That's actually not allowed. The federal SNAP program rules from the Food and Nutrition Service specifically say that SNAP applicants get to provide different kinds of documentation, and the agency has to accept anything that can credibly meet the information needed and provide that. And the other thing I like to highlight for you, which I underline just to be really clear, is that the SNAP agencies are actually supposed to help people get verification documents that are required. If the agency is telling someone that you have to provide a birth certificate, again, this is another one that comes up very, very commonly, then that verification, if it costs money and your client doesn't have the money to pay, $27 to have a birth certificate sent from New Jersey, the agency should be helping them pay for that if they are requiring the client to provide it and the client is not able to. And sometimes reminding them that they have to pay for it if they're requiring that specific birth certificate is a good way to remind them that they can accept other types of documentation, as I said at point 1. So that's sort of the way the SNAP program is structured, and the way that we look at SNAP, the circumstances that are going on right now. Yes, that's right. I was going to say, I don't know if anyone's watching the chat, but someone just commented that clients can provide a verbal attestation or have someone else verify their identity. That's absolutely correct. And it's really, really helpful to a lot of households. But, this is sort of the ideal framework, right? What we were talking about are the rights and the structures of the program when it goes the way it's supposed to. And what we know is that in 47 of essentially 51 SNAP programs in the United States right now, it's not going that way. It's going in other ways. So what does that mean? What are we talking about, and what are we seeing, and what do we think about that? So one of the things that comes up really commonly is that there are barriers that prevent people from accessing SNAP applications and recertifications, and essentially keeping people out of the whole SNAP process on the front end. We are looking at situations where people, as I said, may not be able to get an application form. If they have an application form, they may not actually be able to submit it to the agency and get it in to have their eligibility determined. As I was talking about, there are circumstances where people can't even get into the building to pick up an application. In New York, where I'm based, the social services are administered at the county level. So there are 58 different social services agencies in New York, and they are not related to each other. They are separate from each other. And one of the things that I have done is I've worked on litigation in a number of these different counties about the problems that we've seen here. And we keep the applications behind the counter, and you have to come in, you take a number, you wait for hours just to get up to the window to even ask for the application document. And for example, if you were a person who needed help filling out the form at that point because you didn't have good English capacity, or you had difficulty due to a learning disability with completing the document, you would be out of luck. Perhaps it's the end of the workday and they can't see you that day, so you would have to come back another day to ask for help filling out your application. It was a big problem. And one of the things I will tell you that I did when I was working on that particular problem in that county was I just filled out a form and ordered an entire case of applications. It was something like 500 applications, and just took those and put some at the food pantries and some at the meal sites, left them in piles at the library, homeless drop-in center, just making sure that people actually had access to a pile of applications if they needed them. And that is a relatively simple task, just to get a batch of applications and make sure that people can get them and make them available in a place. After the litigation in that particular county, one of the requirements of the final order was that the applications be kept outside of the DSS in a file cabinet that was out. It was like an office building, so it was outside of the DSS office in the main foyer in the lobby, which sounds silly, but it felt like a big victory at that moment. We also sued a county that was literally restricting the number of people who could come into the building and into the space. And there are absolutely fire and capacity and limitations, but this was different. This was literally the agency saying, we're only willing to see this many clients a day. And for example, if someone showed up later in the day to pick up a SNAP application, if they had already taken the quota that they were going to see, you couldn't come into the office building to pick up an application, even if you didn't need to speak to a worker, which is inappropriate and illegal. So we're thinking about situations where people may not be able to get into a building to pick up a paper application. They may need to request that an application be mailed to them, but no one ever calls them back, or the phone lines are constantly busy. We're definitely talking about call center problems all over the country right now. NCLEJ has been involved for 2 years now, 2.5 years, in litigation against the state of Missouri about problems with the call center there, and the fact that so many calls are dropped. Thousands and thousands of calls are dropped every single month. So people who need service through the phones, particularly in states where there may be huge geographic barriers, where they may not have fully reopened offices after COVID, are not able to access applications and information because the phone system that they are forced to use doesn't have capacity. It's not answered. The calls are dropped. There's no way to request a callback. These are all sort of phone problems that we look at and we think about. And in Missouri, we've been litigating there. We filed the case against the Department of Social Services in 2022. I wanted to make sure I said that right. And have been working on that for 2.5 years. As I said, online applications are another piece of the puzzle. Some states have an online application. There is not a requirement for this, but this is one option. I do think an online application is a good choice for many people, although the cautionary statement I have for you about online applications is that a household cannot be required to have a social security number in order to apply for SNAP. So one of the things that I've seen, it's happening definitely here in New York, a couple of other states, is that the portal that is set up, or the state website that is set up for applicant access related to a number of benefits, including SNAP, essentially has you set up your login linked to a social security number. So like when I go into the New York state logins to do things for the DMV, it's the same login that's used by the benefit system, the like SNAP and cash assistance benefit system. It does link to the ID, to your social security number. And the problem with this is that you are not required to have a social security number for SNAP. To apply for SNAP, I should say. You're not required to have a social security number to apply for SNAP. You have to have a social security number or an equivalent, an EIN equivalent, for receiving SNAP. But the problem is that if there is an online application that is only useful for people that have a social security number, then, for example, a parent who does not have a social security number cannot use an online application in order to apply for benefits for their minor child who is able to receive SNAP benefits because the child has a social security number. This is a thing we call like a mixed status household, where the parent and the child might have two different immigration statuses. and that child can get SNAP. But if that parent can't apply, that child will never get the food benefits that they're entitled to. So these are all sort of point of contact barriers in the SNAP program that we are looking at. And I'm just going to pause for a sec. If you have thoughts or questions, please feel free to throw those in the chat. I am trying to keep an eye on it while I'm talking. The other sort of big access difficulty that we are dealing with and seeing right now in SNAP nationally has to do with delays, which I already mentioned, right? There are these fixed specific timing standards in the federal law. It's 7 days for people that are qualified for what we call expedited processing, who have very few resources and they are in a food emergency, a critical food emergency. It's 30 days for everybody else. There is not a universe where it's 90 days or 80 days. We, as I said, if someone needs extra time to bring in their verification and it takes that beyond 30 days, that is allowable. But on the state side, on the agency side, they don't actually have a window to extend that time because they're behind, because they're short-staffed, because they need more time to get caught up on their work, or they've got people going on vacation. That is not the legal standard. The timing delays in the processing of these applications, right? Once someone's got an application and they submit it to the agency is going to have either the 7 days or the 30 days to get it done, to do everything that needs to happen. And the delays can happen then for a whole bunch of reasons. Sorry about that. Can people get an interview, right? If we think back to those 3 core steps in the process, people are going to apply, they're going to need to interview, they're going to submit verification, and the result of that is they're going to get their eligibility determination. So one place where we see delay happening is at that next step after the application is the interview. In some places, the delay for an interview can take weeks or even months. When I was referencing the litigation I did in New York with the agency that used to keep all the applications behind the counter, and so you'd have to wait in line for hours just to get the application form, and you might not be able to get help on it. In that case, in the same situation, one of the things we saw was that people would get scheduled for an interview 6 or 7 weeks after they applied. You apply on April 1st, your interview is May 13th, maybe you get your SNAP benefits in June. This is not 30 days, right? There is no way that you can calculate and complete an application in 30 days if you're not getting an interview until 45 days later. And then there's verification and eligibility determination even farther out in time than that. NCLEJ's litigation right now in the state of Missouri has focused, as I said, on call center problems related to interviewing as well. What we were seeing and what we were talking to advocates in Missouri about was the fact that almost 50% of the people who applied for SNAP every month in Missouri, sometimes more than 50%, were getting denied. They were not getting benefits. And the reason that they were denied was because they failed to interview. And as I said, they had to call this call center in order to get an interview. They would then wait on hold and on the phone for hours. The calls would drop. They couldn't leave a message to get a call back. Maybe they did call back, but it was weeks later. If you tried to schedule an interview and set up a time, you couldn't, or it would schedule you 2 to 3 months out. So the delay was around the interview, or the denial was around that interview problem. Another thing that comes up frequently is documentation and verification. So it is very common for agencies when they are understaffed or where they are sort of experiencing internal change and chaos to lose the documents that are being submitted to them. people may need to apply 2 or 3 times. They'll send in, I sent in my pay stubs, but it's a month later and they haven't made a decision. So I have to send in my next pay stubs because they're required to have the most recent 30-day pay stubs to make an eligibility determination, and do this sequentially over several months in order to get an eligibility determination. And then just losing those verify. I was denied because I didn't verify my housing cost, which is not actually a valid reason for denial. But let's just say someone gets denied for failing to document their housing costs, and you say, like, I faxed it. Here's my fax receipt. I faxed it in on the 27th, and the agency sort of scratches their head and they don't have it. These are things that are, again, common causes of delay. A lot of times in an understaffed agency, what I might expect to see is that a pile of papers don't actually get sorted. The fax machine runs out of paper eventually and no one's even checking it. And then clients are, that's a good question. Clients are waiting for determinations and they're continually resubmitting. I am seeing a question about whether the access is better in the county administered or state administered states. I think the problems are just different. I would say right now, the county administered places tend to have smaller systems and smaller infrastructure, so they don't have as much, not always, but they generally do not have as much sort of big technology failure because they're not as big. And they don't tend to have as much sort of big system staffing change. But the small county programs are still having staffing issues. It's just different kinds of staffing issues. So like in New York, one of the things we certainly see is that there have been, just these big spates of retirements, and they just aren't filling the positions. The positions are going empty for years, for example. And in another, in a number of states, there were people who quit during COVID and took different positions or made career changes, may have relocated. And in a lot of cases, agencies have just not been able to sort of reach pre-COVID staffing levels for a number of reasons. And then the last issue I just raised here is that people who are approved for SNAP benefits should not have an additional waiting time beyond their eligibility, their notice time, their acceptance letter time to get the EBT card that they need to actually use their benefits. And different states handle this in different ways. This is actually one thing that I think New York generally does reasonably well with, is that they do actually have emergency issuance codes and printouts that people can use, even if they don't have a card in hand on a given day. If someone has a food emergency and they're eligible, for example, for expedited processing, someone can go to a Department of Social Services office in their county, and if they're approved for an expedited SNAP application or they have a food emergency, they can get codes that they can essentially punch in the day of. In some places, they can get a card the day of, but they have codes that they can use the day of. And not every state is doing this. They should be, but they're not making same-day issuances or at least 7-day issuances a material thing that people can carry out. I wanted to just say one more thing about interviewing before I forget, which is that interviewing, people always have a right to ask for an in-person interview, and that has to generally be granted. So even in a state that's using a call center, folks have a right to ask for an in-person interview. So, and I've touched on this as we've been talking. How are lawyers working to improve SNAP access? Well, lawyers are doing a whole bunch of different things. NCLEJ is doing some of them, and lots of other lawyers that we know and we work closely with are doing others. In some places, there are lawyers who are literally helping people file applications, particularly for folks who have complicated needs or are maybe vulnerable. Lawyers are working on applications. A lot of communities also have SNAP application assisters who may be, they are often called nutrition outreach workers or nutrition education workers who can help with that, but lawyers will do this sometimes. Lawyers are helping people ask for disability and language accommodations when they are applying for and seeking SNAP. There's a lot of work going on around language access right now. Lawyers represent people in SNAP hearings. This is great if you've got people who are denied and they were denied for the wrong reason or they should not have been denied. Lawyers can sometimes help with representation in those cases. Lots of states have outreach and connection with their state agencies. And so there are lawyers who are paying attention to how the SNAP program is operating and what's going on to meet with the state agency to raise awareness of the barriers and delays, to do problem solving and troubleshooting work there. They are looking for opportunities to improve and to push the state to do better. There are also folks who meet with local officials and local government about how critical it is to continue funding these state agencies and social services programs at an adequate level to make sure that there's adequate staffing and that the technology that they really rely on gets improved. A lot of folks work with their local anti-hunger organizations to raise awareness of SNAP problems, to meet with clients. I mean, one of the things I did for years was I did outreach to the community action programs in my agency. I went to the homeless drop-in centers, and when I was working more locally as opposed to at the national level, knowing where there were going to be families and feeding sites and meal programs was really important to making sure that people got good SNAP access, and I knew who was having problems. And certainly last on the list, part of this work is also bringing legal cases that are intended to improve SNAP access. So right now, as I said, we've got a big case in Missouri to deal with the call center problems there. We have another piece of ongoing active litigation in the state of Alaska to deal with really, really severe delays there, as well as language access concerns. So, pardon me, ways to help improve SNAP access. Why am I telling you all of this, right? The what do I do next sort of moment. There are a bunch of things that can be done, and my goal certainly is not to come up with the hardest, most labor intensive one, is to think about sort of what opportunities there are to look at folks that you are seeing and talking to who may be experiencing food insecurity and food shortage, to ask a couple of really good targeted questions about what happened. Did you apply? When did you apply? Did you ever get an interview? Did they schedule did they schedule an interview? Could you get through on the phone when you had to call for your interview, or did they ever call you? And figuring out sort of what happened, and then helping to take that story, those really critical pieces of what needs to happen in the SNAP process, to a lawyer who can help figure this out and to help do something. You know, for families who can't access SNAP, can they get on, if you have a computer in your office that you can use for a client or can set up, could they apply from there? Is that someplace that you can do? Can you print out documents that they need or print out a copy of an application? Can you order and pick up a stack of applications to give people? I always love that. I think that's great. That's like one of my favorite things. Can you help people get documentation that they need for SNAP? This means pulling together paperwork. One of the things I just wanted to stress for folks who are working in childcare programs is that dependent care costs in many states are actually countable to help increase a family's SNAP eligibility. So if you are documenting that you are paying for childcare, dependent care, and showing that to your SNAP agency, it should help make the household eligible for a little bit more benefit, because you have these childcare costs, which can be really a lot for a low-income family. Referring families to local legal services organizations, or to those application assisters I was talking about, nutrition outreach workers. A lot of times the food bank network as well, the big food banks, tend to have application assistance as well, and they tend to be well connected. Letting families know when something's wrong, right? If someone has been waiting and they think it's been a really long time on their SNAP application, it's possible it has been. One of the things that has been really heartbreaking um, in talking to clients in the state of Alaska is that people are waiting. There were people who were waiting 7, 8, 9 months to get a decision on a SNAP case, and they didn't even know if the agency still had it or if it had gotten lost. Um, People really start to lose hope, and they've gone all that time without their food. And then they end up in the situation when they do get benefits and they do get processed. Those those applications get processed back to the date they were submitted. So all of a sudden, they then have thousands of dollars of SNAP benefits, which is not a problem, but they don't even know what to do with it, and they don't know how to spend it and use it safely and things like that. Um, so these are all really useful things to talk to people about. We want to keep records of communications. If people are not getting their letters, their notices, anything you can do to sort of keep track of these things or help people keep track, generate data and information to share with legal services, to get in contact and do advocacy with the state agency. And just as a note, because there are so many different states represented, I wanted to include a couple of links about how to find local legal services programs in your area to talk to about SNAP issues that you may be seeing arising, um, as well as to talk about what connecting with the food banks and food pantries, the SNAP outreach workers, to try and connect the information there. There is a very specific question about an immigration status that I'm not going to tackle right now, but you can email me to the individual who's putting that question in the chat. I am happy to triage and help you connect with local programs. I probably can't help every single person, but I'm happy to help you find a local program to help you triage the issues in your state. And with that, if there are quick questions, I can take them in the chat, but I know we're at the top of the hour. There's a question about skimming. So skimming is something that's definitely happening in SNAP. For people who are unfamiliar with this term, there are essentially electronic transactions that are stealing people's SNAP benefits off of the EBT cards without actually taking the card. It's a completely electronic transactional theft. And the question is, are you hearing whether EBT skimming has continued to be a problem or whether there's a role for state policy advocacy groups there? Skimming is absolutely continuing to be a problem. It's sort of geographically shifting. So it's in some places it is less of a problem now than it was like a year ago. And it's sort of coming into other new communities is what I'm essentially hearing. If you are hearing about skimming cases in your community, I am positive that there's a role for state advocacy there. There are folks who have done really thoughtful things with trying to get the states to expand the time period to request aid on skimming, to request additional assistance. So again, I'm happy to respond to questions. Feel free to email me with these as well if I didn't get to you. Thank you all for your time today. It's really been a great opportunity to share this information.